welcome to Planet Poetry. I'm Robin Houghton.
And I'm Peter Kenny. In this episode, Robin interviews Helen Ivory about her 2019 collection, The Anatomical Venus. Because of the title of the book, we've been Googling images that date back to Victorian times of anatomical Venuses, and they're kind of weirdly disturbing and dreamlike, of sort of women with very serene-looking faces with their internal organs on full show.
Yeah, quite gruesome, really. And in fact, Helen tells us a bit more about it. But they struck me, these images, as being almost surreal, almost like a kind of a Dali painting might be. You look at it and think, did this come from the depths of someone's imagination or subconscious? But for the women of the time, of course, the experience was very real.
About the objectification of women, that you have all the sort of doctors leaning over and fiddling around with their guts and so on. Enough of us talking about these things. Let's hear what Helen Ivory had to say to Robin.
Helen Ivory is a poet and visual artist. She edits the webzine Ink, Sweat and Tears and is a lecturer for the UEA National Centre for Writing online creative writing programme. She's also published 5 collections with Blood Axe Books: The Double Life of Clocks, 2002, The Dog in the Sky, 2006, The Breakfast Machine, 2010, Waiting for Bluebeard, 2013, and The Anatomical Venus, 2019. A book of collage mixed media poems, Hear What the Moon Told Me, was published by KFS in 2017, and a chapbook, Maps of the Abandoned City, by Survision in 2019. Helen has received an Eric Gregory Award from the Society of Authors and was awarded Arts Council funding and an Authors Award from the Society of Authors to work on The Anatomical Venus. She lives in Norwich. So Helen Ivory, welcome to Planet Poetry.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
Sorry that I've dragged you indoors on a lovely sunny day, as it is right now, but talk poetry and stuff. The most recent book, The Anatomical Venus, and it's got this really frightening cover to it, hasn't it? This a kind of fetish item, half doll, half angel, half bird wing, half kind of dried flower. There's some shells in there. Is that a pretty good setting of the scene for the themes of this book, would you say?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this I'd say I made the artwork for the cover, and it grew out of the whole body of work, really. What I wanted to get in is a kind of poppety feel. If you go to the Witchcraft Museum in Boscastle, you will see quite a lot of poppets there made up of various bits and pieces. So I wanted that kind of feel. I also wanted to get elements in. So she's winged, so there's the air, and there's shells, so there's the sea, so there's everything really. Yeah, she's some kind of poppet goddess.
I love that word. So poppet, is that a technical term?
Oh yeah. People usually associate poppets with voodoo, putting pins and various bits and pieces in. But during lockdown, I make needle felt sculptures, and I got into making. Well, first of all, I made a poppet for myself to sit on a fox, but that's another story. And then quite a lot of other people wanted poppets. They're kind of the spirit of hope.
This book is about women and what it is to be female, and through history mainly. And there's this focus on attitudes towards women, treatment of women, physical and mental health. There's some pretty shocking and quite strange things that go on, that have gone on. Is that a fair description of where you're coming from?
Oh, yeah. Definitely. I mean, and once you start reading these texts, such as the Malleus Maleficarum, the Witch's Hammer, and all kinds of things. First of all, I started with reading The Female Malady by Elaine Showalter. Then I started looking at more primary sources. And once you start reading into the way that women have been talked about and portrayed and represented, usually by men, because men have traditionally always had the conch, so to speak, that they've always been, because women weren't allowed to do things like anything really pretty much until quite recently, even being in control of their own bodies. The reason that I started on this particular train was that the book follows Waiting for Bluebeard, which was it's an autobiographical book about my childhood and then living in an abusive relationship. So how did I end up being the woman living in Bluebeard's house, basically? And Bluebeard is traditionally this kind of wife murderer of the fairy tale. So there's all manner of ways that you can be murdered without physically dying. I hung all of that on, the Bluebeard kind of archetype, I guess. And then I was doing readings from the Bluebeard book. There were quite a lot of women that came up to me afterwards, and I heard from lots of people who had lived with a Bluebeard, or been made to feel other and strange, and you're not like us, i.e. men. What's wrong with you? So then I got into reading The Female Malady by Lane Showalter, which is about hysteria and the history of hysteria, and then I just kind of I went off into all these fantastic and terrifying rabbit holes, really. And the more you read, the more agog you are.
Yes, well, that's true of this book as well. I think the Cabinet of Curiosities stories through to these personal histories of women in asylums and right through to the present day. Is there something you'd like to read that's perhaps a good starter?
Sure, thank you. I'll read the poem which is the first in the book, because, I don't know, for me, it sums quite a lot of stuff off. Right, so that there are things in it. The title comes from the Bible, "Thou shalt not suffer a sorceress to live." Some of the words or phrases or some of the incidents were things that were marked as things that people said during the Essex witch trials. The people that were being accused of being witches weren't all women, but tended to be mainly women. And so in the poem, there are things like the imps, which are suspicious animals, the women that live on their own, cats, goats, whatever comes to hand. So they're imps, and the idea of the bad mother. So the witch would be suckling her imps. So there's something kind of dark and dodgy going on there. And they have the witch's pap, so that's in there. And also in here, there's a lot in here, isn't there?
Yeah.
Also in here, there's the wandering womb as well. So the womb was considered an animal within an animal. In olden days medicine, if there was anything wrong with a woman, if something, malfunctioned about her, it's because her womb was in the wrong place. So you had to tempt it back using nice, herbs to just draw it back where it should be. This is, "Thou shalt not suffer a sorceress to live." For her neighbour's sickness was more than merely unnatural, for he sang perfectly without moving his lips. For she is intemperate in her desires and pilfers apples from the orchard, for she hitches her skirts to clamber the fence. For her womb is a wandering beast, for she is husbandless and at candle time brazenly trades with the devil. For she spoke razors to her brother who has looked upon her witch's pap and the odious suckling imp. For the corn is foul teeth, for the horse is bedlam in its stable, for the black cow and the white cow are dead. So often these people who are accused of being witches, if anything went wrong in the village, then it was their fault.
And interestingly, you said before about this idea of women being bad mothers and just bad at what they're supposed to be good at. And in this poem, we've got the accusation of her being husbandless and the odious suckling imp.
Yeah.
This idea of habits, bad habits, comes throughout the book. I've noticed that word appears in many of the poems. A woman not being neat and orderly. Those words come up a lot as well, and I guess they probably came up in your research.
Yeah, they're the phrases that would appear in the records for the St Andrew's Asylum, the records that I looked at from from when they were legible, really, because when you look at primary sources, handwriting used to be massively curly.
Oh, right.
So then I started looking at kind of 1800s, 1900s, and these are the things that were being said about the women. Yeah, these things, her habits were not cleanly, and those records and the words that people used to use to talk about people, it helped me, I don't know, enrich my language and make it feel authentic.
You kind of took on a lot of the vocabulary, and that's part of the atmosphere that you've woven throughout, I think. Certain words, I'd find the next poem would include a certain keyword that had been in the previous poem, so the imp follows through. We've got the prickers are here, then the next poem, and pricking shortly found her the witch's mark. I'm really interested in how you order poems or put them together in a full collection. Is that something that the poems suggest, and you kind of put them all out on the floor and shuffle them around until they look good? Or is it more of a design, do you think, from the beginning? Like, this is my kind of thread, a bit like writing a novel. Here's my kind of plot line. Something's missing here. Something needs to go in here.
I was conscious of that there were things that I needed to write about as I was reading. If I read something and one quote from it seemed to sum up everything that I've read, then that would often be, I would include that, under the title. So that would be a good thing to hang the poem from. I think in so far as threads are concerned, and, picking up words, I mean, the word pricking is something that they used to do. If you go to the Museum of Witchcraft, you will be able to see needles that they used to use. If there was a part on your body, I don't know, a mole that looked a bit dodgy, if you pricked it with a needle and it didn't hurt, then that was a witch's mark. I think that was the logic to it. So, that was an actual thing. And then watchers were people that would stay with the accused all night just to see if their familiars would appear at night. So, I think if you do all of this research and immerse yourself, and then these things will just emerge. And, in the book, there are Wunderkammer poems kind of threaded through. And that was, I suppose that was a structural idea. I quite like the theme of the Wunderkammer, which is the cabinet of curiosities, the precursor to the museum, where lots of bits and pieces are things that wouldn't possibly exist in the natural world next to each other, and you bring them all together. I think everyone has their own Wunderkammer in their house, actually. Mine's my desk. I've got all kinds of random things. They're all kind. People have them on their fridges or their things that matter or appeal to them somehow. And sometimes the thing can bring back a whole memory.
I think that's a generous way of describing a cabinet of curiosities. I always think of them as sort of little mini freak shows. I think there's a museum in Brighton, the Booth Museum. I haven't stepped inside for years because it's too frightening.
Oh, wow. I must go there.
You must. It's full of, stuffed creatures. And there you've got the two-headed sheep and all kinds of weird and wonderful and not so wonderful stuff. And the whole building is this sort of real Victorian repository of darkness and weirdness.
That sounds amazing. I'd love to go.
And the thing about these Wunderkammer is they were made by men, weren't they, on the whole?
Yeah, men used to travel. Well, men had Wunderkammers. Women had dolls' houses.
Ah, is that right?
Yeah, when you go to stately homes, and you often it would have a doll's house, a replica of the entire house. That was often for the women because they could have control over their little house there. Not over the big one, but over the little one. So they can play, on a miniature scale of being in control.
That's interesting because you've got the Wunderkammer poems and you do have some Doll's House poems as well, don't you, towards the end?
Oh, I do, yeah.
I think we need to hear one of the Wunderkammer poems now.
Okay. I'm going to read Wunderkammer with Ophelia and Hospital Bath. All of the reading that I did behind these 12 lines is the idea that photographs were used in the study of mental illness. And I first read about that in the Female Melody. There's some really famous photographs by Charcot on the photographs of women who were identified as hysterics. And there was a type of hysteric called the Ophelia, and she had a graceful and alluring way. And I was interested also in the drowning. There's a theme of water going through the book. the way that witches or, people accused of witches were swum, I think they used to call it.
Dunked in the water.
Yeah, dunked in that. There's a kind of cleansing or that element, but water was often used as a cure. There were things like the Neptune's girdle, where there was a length of fabric and it was a certain temperature and you'd wrap it around your womb.
God.
And it was called Neptune's girdle to calm your womb right down.
It's amazing the amount of thought that's gone into this by gentlemen.
It's very practical.
What to do about these difficult wombs.
I know. It makes complete sense, doesn't it? So there's a little quote for this poem, which is from A System of Medicine in 1886, and it goes, "Hysteric paroxysms do not occur when the patient is alone. There is something artistic in the mode of approach. The hysteric patient gathers her robe about her and falls gracefully." So this is Wunderkammer with Ophelia and Hospital Bath. She fancies that the camera is the eye of heaven, so each performance is measured by this accord. The hooded doctor-priest must be the mind of God, directing his machinery, ravening for light. Lilies from the river wild the metal bath. She is a vessel inside a vessel, and both their bloods are cooling. I think that last image is the painting, Ophelia. I think the model that he used, she did pose in a metal bath while he painted her, and I think she died quite soon after that, but probably that wouldn't have helped.
I like the way you described before, this 12 lines of poem and the amount of research sort of that it sits on top of, and the amount you've packed into it there. As we've mentioned earlier, you do include quite a lot of actual stories here of actual women who were incarcerated in asylums. Actually, it's one particular asylum, isn't it? Did you go to the records of this place and you dug up these actual stories?
Yeah, that's right. It's the in the Norfolk Record Office. There are all kinds of sources like this. So yeah, this is the St Andrews Asylum records, and you can, when such things are possible again, you can request that they bring out these massive books for you, and then you can actually spend the whole day. They had photographs as well. They had photographs of when people came into the asylum and photographs when they left, and you could see how massively distressed a lot of them looked. And they put in their weight, their occupation, and then there were photographs when they left. Often they would be sitting upright and wearing a hat. So that means that they must have been cured. Often it was to do with their appearance.
They looked orderly and neat.
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought your poem Housewife Psychosis was key, really, because this idea of women undergoing kind of enforced domesticity or even slavery, and women who weren't able to cope with unreliable men or painful periods were candidates for the asylum.
Yeah, absolutely. All the time when I was writing about these women, I was thinking how this kind of life would affect me. So in the periods of time when I was going backwards and forwards to the record office, it was just really odd. I just felt the women calling me as I was walking towards it. It's really, really strange. Because you see the photographs, so you know what they look like. Yeah, as I say, I just put myself in their position and who I would be. Born to the class that I am, so I was working class, council estate, Luton. I'd have gone into some kind of domestic service. So, I wouldn't be the me, I wouldn't be the person who, writes poems or the person who makes artwork. One of the things that I was struck by was the occupation. So I've written a list poem of the occupations that was put in for these women and how they were described. So they were always described by who the main male person was in their life or what their job was. And I just think as a list, this just says so much.
Yes, absolutely.
Here goes the poem. Okay, so it's Female Casebook 6, St Andrews Asylum, 1898. Occupation. Needlewoman, cook, laundress, housekeeper, parlourmaid, domestic servant, parlourmaid, domestic servant, wife of carpenter, wife of labourer, wife of farm labourer, charwoman, domestic servant, wife of blacksmith, mother's help, wife of tailor, married, farmer's widow, farmer's daughter, bricklayer's daughter, wife of shepherd, wife of coachman, wife of boatman, housemaid, prostitute, nun.
I like the way that married is a sort of separate category. Never mind all the other wives.
It just says so much about how women weren't women in their own right.
Yeah.
Well. And that last word, the last word is none, as in None, because someone thought it was none once.
Oh,
None,
I see, yes.
It wasn't a deliberate, it wasn't a deliberate pun. Shall I read the poem that you mentioned, the housewife psychosis poem?
Oh, yes, do.
So the poem is Housewife Psychosis, The Dreams of Katharina Bauer. So Katharina Bauer was the mother of Dora, whose real name was Ida Bauer, subject to Freud's fragment of an analysis in a case of hysteria. And Freud dismissed Katharina as an uncultivated and foolish woman who fell victim to housewife psychosis when confined, as many women were, to the domestic sphere. I think I'd have had a touch of housewife psychosis. Anyway, so this is a short sequence. Housewife psychosis, The Dreams of Katharina Bauer. In the dream, I am shut in a bright, clean room where a neat square window holds a Danube like a thought, attempting to part for the Black Sea. But the will of the window is stronger. I write this in my notebook, slice out the page, lay it down in the grate, then strike it with a match. In the second dream, the house burns with electric light. A gilt wood angel spreads its wings above the roof and stares down on my dull crown with fervent incivility. A mound of ashes in a morning room corner puts on my father's coat. I take up my broom, sweep until my hands are blistered raw. In the third dream, I am shining the silver of every smoke-tainted coffee house in Vienna. Spoons queue up, clever schoolboys on the first day of term. I polish their faces. All of the girl children are folded lace parasols, packed up in a casket at the back of the nursery. I arrive at the station in my last dream to find the whole continent darkened by smog. No one was waiting, and none approached me. I saw my outline sketched by a careless hand. I think I read once that Freud called female sexuality a dark continent. So something you didn't want to go into very much. So
it shows how much he knew about it. I think Freud's got a lot to answer for, hasn't he?
Oh God,
Let's face it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've managed to get all the kind of witchery into here as well, haven't we? The sort of the water, the river, the broom, and the striking of the match, the burning, and the idea of spells and ashes. And the smog at the end.
Yeah, it's all
dark,
flipping heck.
Very dark. and then these children in the packed up in a casket at the back of the nursery.
Yeah.
Again, I got these visions of, you said about the Wonder Camo, and in fact, you're right, in some of these stately homes, there is a nursery that's been laid out, supposedly as it was, although I'm sure it was never as untidy as that, with all the toys everywhere. You sort of look at these toys one by one and you think, God, did you really let a toddler play with that metal armed thing or that face on that doll? Oh, no. Thank you for reading that.
Okay.
Now, of course, I think a lot of listeners will know you as the editor of Ink, Sweat and Tears online poet. How long's that been going now?
Well, I've been involved in it for about 11 years, I think.
Really?
Yeah, I know. It's scary how time...
And before that?
It was set up by Charles Christian, who he writes short stories. He does lots of other things. And he set that. He was doing a diploma course that I used to teach on, and at the end of it, he set up a webzine. And I don't think there were many webzines around then. It's been going for about 15 years or something.
Yeah.
So publishing something new every day. And because it's an online thing, We can do all kinds of things, word and image, and we're just doing some. We now have the technology to easily kind of put film poems and lots of different media up.
You've helped me with your opinions and advice in my little book about how to get published in Mercury magazine. So I know you have all the same kind of grief that other magazine editors get from time to time in terms of, well, various things. People not following the submissions guidelines, I think, is probably the number one thing that comes up again and again.
I think people don't realise that you get hundreds of submissions if nobody followed the guidelines. I know it seems, it's a bit of a faff, really. Oh, really? Have we got to read all of that? Oh, it's a massive list. Really? But, there's just one of me. Most people who are editors, they have lots of jobs because, we have to have this portfolio thing. Actually, most people who are writers or artists have lots of jobs.
And you've mentioned that you do needle felting.
That's
animals and things. And I mean, is this a whole new thing, or have you always done a lot of different creative activities sort of in parallel?
Well, I went to art school originally, and before I started writing, when I was at school, I did art, and I was always being good at drawing and all that kind of stuff. And then it was at Norwich Art School, George Surtees was our poetry tutor, and he said, "Oh yeah, you're a poet." I think, well, really? Oh, that's news.
George, he anointed you.
He really did, because I come from the kind of background where poetry wasn't a thing. I found as soon as I started writing, I found it, I wouldn't say easier, but, it came to me a lot quicker than the artwork that I was trying to do at that time. Oh. And at that time, I used to want to do theatre design, but actually that's a bit complicated, isn't it? Because you can't just be a theatre designer. You have to be involved with lots of people. First of all, you need a play. But I like the idea of making a little environment where things happen in, and actually I can do that with poems, except that it doesn't take up as much space, and it doesn't cost any money, really.
Well, yes,
and you can keep
true.
a whole poem in your head.
Yes.
So that's why I started writing. But then I went back to making things again, making collages and assemblages, so ready-made things. So I make word and image collages, so taking words from various sources and putting together to make something new, make a new narrative.
Are you an Instagram poet?
A little bit. I think you can get away with lots of things and call yourself an Insta poet.
Yeah.
I do sometimes tag things as Insta poetry. I mean, I love Instagram as a medium because I'm quite a visual person, and it's just a nice format. It's a good kind of scrapbooky thing.
It's a present day version of having a wonder camera, isn't it, I suppose?
Absolutely. I forgot to mention when we were talking about wonder cameras earlier, the anatomical Venus itself is a wonder camera, because it was this sculpture of a woman for male doctors to learn from. So you could actually, if you Google anatomical Venus, you will see these beautiful kind of sex and death representations of women that often they would have human hair as well, and they're made in wax, which looks like human skin. So they're laying all kind of sprawled out like some alluring sleeping beauty, except you can see their innards and you can take them out. You can take the womb out, you can take the fetus out of the womb. Yes. So that's a locked cabinet as well that's easily unlocked with all the male doctors.
You've got your poem Dissecting Venus, haven't you, where you go into the basically dissecting a woman to discover what the hell's going on in her body.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And the Little Venus, I suppose.
Oh, yeah, the Little Venus.
Maybe would you read the Little Venus? Because I think that's...
I would do.
This one, I sort of read and had to read it again, but didn't want to read it again. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, ew, I don't want to read it again, but I'm going to have to.
Okay, I shall read this. I'm not used to reading this one. I think this is the first time I've read it out loud to anyone. So, this is the Little Venus. Gentlemen, the Venerina is a dissectable young woman, presented voluptuously in her final moments. She has been cast for your instruction. See, her organs are dislocated layer by layer. The heart was her undoing. Observe the walls, too slight to sustain her through her 20th year. Yet how charming, the rope of pearls at her throat. The throat itself is a repository for kisses. Now scrutinize the sleeping fetus in the womb. Cradle it so you might feel a waxen effigy of life.
Ugh, there's that horrible sexualization.
Yeah, it is, isn't it, actually?
But very clever, very clever. But cold. I love this cold, creepy kind of voice talking here. And you can picture all these men crowding round and getting a kick out of looking at this thing.
Imagine maybe a little drool in the corner of their mouths or something as well as they're doing. Yeah, it's really creepy, isn't it?
So tell me, are you working on any new poetry at the moment? A new collection maybe, or some new ideas, new projects or anything? Or...
Well, there's a couple of things. Something I've made a start on called The End of the Pier Show. I had a chapbook published by Surreal called Maps of the Abandoned City, and that was published in 2019. And it was about a city that people had built up and then had to leave. So I was making a start on thinking of more poems for this and how I could build it up to a collection from a chapbook length. And then it actually started happening. We had the actual apocalypse, so people were abandoning the cities. There was nobody in shops.
Yeah.
So I've stepped away from that idea a little bit, although it's still there. So there's that, which I'll probably come back to. There is also, I'm at the moment writing some what I'm calling resistance spells. So spells to counter violence against women. When I was writing the Venus poems, I realised that obviously you can't cover all of the stuff that I was trying to cover in 60 pages of poems or however long that is there. So I feel that there's some plenty of unfinished business there. So I'm looking at those themes. I'm looking at the history of medicine and how women's health has been overlooked. Even in modern medical studies, women are not considered the norm.
Yes, yes.
So I'm thinking in terms of that as well.
Interesting.
I'll see what happens when I do the research.
Yes. Like you say, research can take you in another direction or not.
Absolutely.
This has been really fascinating. Thank you. And a lot of fun as well, in a kind of dark way. So thank you for taking part. It's been really great.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
So when I was listening to that, this phrase popped into my mind, a history of gaslighting. In a way, her poems kind of collect those moments when men have made women feel weird just for being women.
Yeah. And in fact, she does say, doesn't she, that this collection came out of The Bluebeard, her previous book, and that partly from the idea that she felt she had been living with a Bluebeard in a previous relationship. So
I found Helen's investigations into, how women being women has been treated with suspicion and superstition and pathologized and, from witchcraft to Freud and beyond. I think it's a really kind of important area to address. Her researches have proved to be really sort of fertile in terms of creating poetry, it seemed to me.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, as she said towards the end, she feels like she's only really touched the seam of material there that she wants to write about and explore. And clearly, as you say, through her research, she's uncovered a huge wealth of material. Some of the things she was telling me, I sort of vaguely felt that I knew about how women were treated for if they had black cats or didn't have husbands, they ended up being accused of witchcraft. But there was a lot of detail in there that I wasn't aware of, and it's quite fascinating in a dark, rather macabre sort of way. There's the anatomical Venus and
I loved all that. They're rather bizarre objects. There's something winsome about them, and yet they've got all their guts, that you can pull apart and reassemble and so on.
And a real kind of Jack the Ripper kind of, and the
Yeah.
idea, and the poppets. I was surprised, that I hadn't come across the word poppet in that meaning. I've always just thought poppet is some kind of little term of endearment for a little child.
That's
or
what
something.
I thought, yeah. The research that sort of yielded up poems almost straight away, almost like a found poem, that description of women's occupations. She didn't really had to, it was her selection of it, her curation of her research is quite inspiring. That was a fully formed poem, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I liked the look of it on the page as well, this thin list with a lot of space around it.
Wunderkammer, that was a word I learnt as well. I'd heard of a cabinet of curiosities. I didn't know it was called that. And that poem about Ophelia and the hospital bath, I really liked that idea, and it was making me think of that picture by Millet.
Yes, indeed. And Helen did mention the fact that the model that Millet had used for that painting did in fact die soon after from from exposure, lying in that
sitting
bath,
in a bath,
freezing cold for goodness knows how long.
She's talking about a cabinet of curiosities, and it was a precursor to museums and assembling lots of objects. In a sense, a poetry collection is something that's an assembled collection of things. And in a way, because what she's writing about is so kind of historically grounded and so on, you begin to wonder about the person that's got the cabinet, the poet, and what Helen's like. Why has she chosen to have a little cabinet full of these grotesque things,
Well, certainly the Wunderkammer poems, there's quite a few of them, and they have titles which are themselves little Wunderkammer. For example, Wunderkammer with Homestead and Aeolian Harp. Wunderkammer with Black Coffee and Ghost Moth.
Ooh.
Yes, they're intriguing. And something that Helen's very modest about, I think, is her artwork. I mean, as she said, she's a trained artist. The fact that she creates her own book covers, and I'll be posting a copy of this book cover of The Anatomical Venus on the website.
Yeah, I really respond to people that inhabit the kind of imaginative space their poems live in, to the point that they're sort of drawing and kind of exploring in other ways as well, this kind of imaginative territory they've carved out for themselves.
Yeah. And I think also a lot of people know Helen's name, at least, from Ink, Sweat and Tears.
Yeah.
And she said at one point, actually, it's really nice to be asked about my own poetry, because people don't know or forget that, and she's written several books of poems, published by Blood Axe. She's a fine poet. And yet people say, oh yeah, Helen Ivory, isn't she Ink, Sweat and Tears? So it's nice to sort of let a bit of air into that side of her practice.
Right, Robin, I happen to know you've been reading Thomas Tranströmer.
I have. Well done for saying his name. I thought you were going to leave that to me.
It makes you pull a strange face when you say it, though, for some reason.
I expect many of our listeners know Thomas Tranströmer, but those who don't, I'll tell you, he was a Swedish poet. He died in 2015, and a fine poet. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2011, and apparently the citation was because through his condensed, translucent images, he gives us fresh access to reality.
Yeah, actually, a couple of episodes ago, we were speaking to Yang Lian, and we read a translation of a poem he wrote about Tranströmer. He was a friend of his as well.
Oh, yeah, I remember
he's
now,
come up in our pod already.
Tranströmer, he worked as a psychologist with juvenile offenders for quite a bit of his life. And the book I've been reading it's a selected called The Half-Finished Heaven in Penguin Modern Classics, and it's been translated by Robert Bly. And Robert Bly was a long-time collaborator. And in fact, the selection here also includes extracts from some letters from the poet to, well, Robert Bly was a poet as well, letters between them, shall we say. The poetry, I found it really intriguing. He his poems, they seem to portray these quite dark, Nordic noir landscapes, but they're everyday landscapes. He seems to perceive much more than most of us would, images pushing through wallpaper or smells coming up through the fence boards. And from a poem called Street Crossing, it goes, far under the traffic, deep in earth, the unborn forest waits still for 1,000 years. These kind of surreal moments, I would say, come at you. There's one poem which begins with him shaving, and he switches on the electric razor, and the noise it makes, it grows into a roar. It grew into a helicopter, and the voice, the pilots, pierced the noise, shouting, "Keep your eyes open. You're seeing this for the last time."
Wow.
That's from a poem called The Open Window. I couldn't classify a lot of this as nature poetry, because there are plenty of vehicles, cars, buses, factories, domestic interiors. In fact, it's more about spaces generally, I think. Real spaces, imagined spaces, but also metaphorical spaces. And nature always seems to be in motion, but the things you expect to be moving are often frozen or behaving very strangely. So there's one poem where he describes a bus moving out of the shadow of a cold mountain and turning its nose towards the sun, creeping up in a roar. And we have children standing in a silent clump by a bus stop. This sense of things changing very, very slowly. I like this line from a poem called Below Freezing. The light grows as gradually as our hair. So, I don't know, the word surreal did come to mind, but it really made me start to think what we mean by that. Surreal meaning actually more than real, or a way of perceiving what we thought was unreal and realizing it's real. There's a real beauty in the poems, even the more melancholy ones. So poems that I would go back to again and again. Really, really interesting.
Yeah, I've read his work before. He's on my shelf, and I dip back. I love that idea about the forest that's kind of under the town, but there is that sense of just kind of the force of life, if that doesn't sound too kind of up itself, that his poems actually have that sense of being full of the energy of nature. I think you're right. It's not necessarily nature poetry, but there's a kind of primal force that's really arresting.
It's a good way of putting it. I like that, the primal force. It's the life is there. We don't see it moving and changing because I suppose we're here for just such a split second in the face of the world, the universe, etc. So how can we see it moving? How can we see it changing? Shall I read a poem?
Yeah, please.
From this.
Yeah.
So this is in a section which covers 3 collections: Resonance and Footprints from 1966, Night Vision from 1970, and a collection of letters. So I'm not quite sure which collection this comes from, but it's called Traffic. The semi-trailer crawls through the fog. It is the lengthened shadow of a dragonfly larva crawling over the murky lake bottom. Headlights cross among dripping branches. You can't see the other driver's face. Light overflows through the pines. We have come, shadows, chassis, from all directions in failing light. We go in tandem after each other, past each other, sweep on in a modest roar into the open, where the industries are brooding. And every year the factory buildings go down another 1/8 of an inch. The earth is gulping them slowly. Pores no one can identify have left a print on the glossiest artefacts dreamed up here. Pollen is determined to live in asphalt. But the horse chestnut trees loom up first, melancholy, as if they intended to produce clusters of iron gloves rather than white flowers. And past them the reception room. A fluorescent light out of order blinks on and off. Some magic door is around here. Open, and look downward through the reversed periscope, down to the great mouths, the huge buried pipes where algae is growing like the beards on dead men. And the cleaner swims on in his overcoat of slime, and his strokes weaker and weaker. He will be choked soon. And no one knows what will happen. We only know the chain breaks and grows back together all the time.
Wow. That sense of humans being kind of dwarfed by nature, and sort of the factories sinking back into the land. And
yeah, an eighth of an inch at a time. And then there's this weird reverse periscope at the end, and there's some poor bugger swimming around in the slime.
And it talks about algae. It's all these kind of natural things that are gradually undermining, and that we'll all return to the slime.
I mean, it should be gloomy, but I'm excited by that poem. It's like, wow.
It makes me think of the photographs of, is it Pripyat, near Chernobyl, this town where, had to be hastily abandoned, and people have gone in and taken photographs of all the buildings there that have been overgrown and reclaimed by nature, and you've got sort of lots of animals all just roaming about there. But that sense that we're just a few kind of accidents away from that happening all over again. And actually, that's quite nice, the idea that nature could actually triumph again.
Yeah, yeah. So, what's been on your bedside reading lately, Peter?
Yeah, well, it's, how we've all got that kind of great skyscraper of books that we've yet to read.
Yes.
And sort of nearing the top of that was this collection by Robert Hamburger called Blue Wallpaper.
Ah, yes.
And I actually bought this about a year and a half ago. Robert was doing a reading, and I bought it from him then. I'm ashamed to say I haven't opened it until like 2 days ago. And I'm so pleased I did, because he's one of those poets that there's a quietness about it, but it's consistently moving. The sort of phrase that came to my mind was that the poems are all happy in their own skin somehow. They exist. They're not kind of making any overt claims on your attention in a showy or kind of pyrotechnic way, but they just perfectly do the job. And I find that incredibly satisfying. There's something just beautiful about a poem that's just, it's almost like a little living thing on its own. And once you sort of enter its world, it's just brilliant. There's lots of sonnets, and there's kind of elegiac poems for his mother, and also a childhood friend. It just immediately connected with me emotionally. The poems are deceptively easy to read. You can speed through the collection. I've read it twice, in the space of 2 days now. But, it's so well worth going back. I'll read one, which is called Coming Home. A late sun slowly swerves behind the flats. Foxes skulk between dustbins. This playground empties like a name called over and over to come home. Windows, paint-lit squares against the black, one beside another, each dwindling block docked like an ocean liner for the dark. That young man's waiting again when you enter the estate at night, stops you politely with the thinnest echo of a smile, says, "Don't think I'll wait till Saturday to slit your throat." He's gone now, scared you years ago. No one shouts your name to come back home. Climb the stairs, that sandpaper scrape your shoes make with each step tattoos your skin. Reach number 45 again, third story, red door. But the keys are lost, your pockets empty. No one answers, or whoever answers never heard of anyone who looks like you. So just, lovely. And that sense of being able to return in some way to the past, to the same kind of estate perhaps, but nobody knows you there,
Yeah, and so many of the details are what he remembers. His footsteps on the stairs, and the bully boys of the estate, the colour of the door, and yet actually you kind of don't exist there anymore now.
Yeah.
Yes, lovely. I've got this collection. I'm a bit of a Robert Hamburger fan, I must admit. He's a lovely man and very modest, and I think he's a fine poet. But like you say, his work, I like that expression, it's happy in its skin. He's not got anything to prove.
Yeah,
in that
that's
sense.
what I mean.
He's got a new book coming out actually very soon.
Yeah. It's prose, isn't it?
It's to do with John Clare. He walked in his footsteps, I think.
It's called A Length of Road.
Oh, yes, exactly. Thank you. I think it's creative non-fiction, I think you'd call it.
Yeah.
Which I think will be really interesting. Yeah, worth seeking out.
Yeah, one of the words that leapt out at me from the back of the book jacket was the word humane. There's just something really lovely about being in his company somehow that, it makes you feel like a better person after you've read it.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, that's nice.
That's not something you always get from poetry.
No.
I'm going to read more of his back catalogue. Yeah, great book. So, Robert Hamburger's Blue Wallpaper is from the Waterloo Press. It was published in 2019.
So here's an interesting thing. Somebody tweeted the other day. This is what she said. 2 years, 5 months, and 7 days later, I have heard back. They read my poems with interest, but unfortunately cannot find a place for them at this time.
Oh my God.
So that's interesting. So that had 550 likes and 19 retweets and quite a few comments in the sense of at this time seems to be the part of the phrase that everyone jumped on. Like, what do they mean at this time? 2.5 years later? Well, if you'd have read them 2.5 years ago, that might have been the right time. And clearly a kind of a form response rather than anything personal. You think perhaps even sorry for the delay or something. I don't know. What is this acceptable?
Well, why you wonder why they bother, because it's just kind of, because it's like the stages of grief, isn't it, when you send something out like that, and that you're in denial and then raging about it, and you come to a cold acceptance that it's just gone west somehow. Yeah,
you think so. It's almost drawing attention to it by sending out the reply after all this time, isn't it?
2.5 years later, we're still rejecting you. Just to let you know.
Anyway, no, I think that's quite funny. Unless it had been in the bottom of some in tray, and whoever responded in the office, didn't look at the dates and just did a whole bunch together, and this was one of them. I suppose that's possible, isn't it? Yeah. The thorny issue of admin among magazines. As we all know, magazines are run for love, not money, often by individuals. And yet, some of those magazines, including the ones run by individuals, are able to somehow process their thousands and thousands of submissions.
Humanely, yeah.
Humanely is wonderfully desirable. Not always possible, but to even do them in a timely fashion is something, isn't it? I'm not going to be rude about magazine editors per se.
No.
I'm a friend to we are both friends to magazine editors.
We like them. They do great work.
I don't have any terrible stories like that, I don't think. Do you? Anything like that?
Well, I've had, sent things out which you just simply never heard from again. I think that's a magazine can go out of publication and so on.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had things accepted by magazines that have then disappeared, which is a bit galling.
Oh, no.
I mean, it's such a thankless task, though, isn't it, being an editor?
It is.
And we expect such unimpeachable behaviour from editors.
And we usually get it, don't we, to be fair?
Yeah. It's that time of the year where I'm thinking about sending out poems again, so just sending you love, editors.